If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Truckers, what is something you have witnessed driving at night that gave you chills? The scariest thing that has ever happened to me. About 10 years ago, I ran out at night to a 7-Eleven to get a pack of smokes. There was a 7-Eleven right outside of my subdivision. I'm standing in line and a huge dude gets in line behind me. No big deal. I'm not a small woman myself. I'm about 5 feet 10 inches and, at the time, was almost 300 pounds. But this dude was substantially larger. I'd say about 6 feet 5 inches. Close to 400 pounds. He complimented my necklace. And I just got the creepiest vibe from him. And I never ignore creepy vibes. I know better. I said thank you, got my smokes and got in my car. As soon as I'm pulling away, he's getting into his truck and starts it. I pull out of the parking lot left. So does he. I pull a right turn into my subdivision. So does he. I go up the 2 more streets and go to pull a right onto my street. So does he. At this point I'm pretty freaked out. So instead of parking outside of my house, I just keep driving around my neighborhood. He followed me around for 20 minutes. Taking every single turn I did. I was just about to call the cops or my dad or someone, when he gave up and turned down a street that takes you out of my subdivision. Stay alert, folks. Not nighttime, but close enough. My dad is a truck driver who regularly makes trips to a nearby major city. This city is known as one of the most dangerous cities in the country, so my dad takes special precautions. One of them being he always leaves several car lengths in front of him at a red light so he can get out if needed. One day around 5 a.m. he was sitting at a red light and someone hit him so hard that his truck moved forward several feet and it knocked the hat off of his head. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw someone run up to the back of his trailer and faint. He decided he should stay put and wait for the police to show up. Turns out a Cadillac had hit him from behind going 110 miles per hour. Both men in the front seat were completely decapitated. You could see the spot on the trailer where their heads hit. The driver was still drunk and high from the night before. My dad was put on leave for several weeks and endlessly questioned. For some reason the police thought it was suspicious that he had left space between him and the next car. He felt really guilty about it for a long time, but we told him had he not been there they would have hit the cars in front of him and more people likely would have died. I was a kid when this happened and he never let me ride along with him again. I'm not a trucker, but my dad was for 15 plus years, and he tells this story all the time. One night around 2 a.m. my dad was hauling coal in a semi off of a place called 22 Mountain. He got super tired, and decided to pull off and get some rest before finishing his haul the next morning. Just as he was drifting off to sleep in the bed in the back of his truck, he heard the song I Love You Baby by Frank Sinatra start to play right outside of his sleeper cabin. Considering that this mountain was pretty much deserted, even on its busiest days, he was pretty confused and went to the front of the truck to see where it was coming from. There, smack dab in the middle of the road, was a woman that appeared to be dancing. She had on a white party dress, her hair was cut in a bob, and one high heel as the other one was nowhere in sight. My dad started the truck, and sped off, knowing that something about her wasn't right. As he was driving off, he claims that he drove straight through the woman like she was made of mist, and he saw her in his review mirror virtually unaffected. My uncle is a very skeptic, stoic truck driver that thinks all superstition is nonsense. At family gatherings, he never tells any stories or anything, he mostly just sits around the table and discusses some business ideas with the older men exclusively. There was this one time, however, when he rounded up everyone at a gathering to tell some sort of disturbing story from his last voyage. He seemed on edge that day. He had to do this very long grain delivery to the far north of the country, so he asked a retired friend to come along so that he would have someone to keep him company and help him out in case something went wrong. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning, and they were passing through this very dark road with a soybean field to the left and a dense forest on the right. It was in the middle of absolutely nowhere and a heavy tropical rain was pouring down. No villages nearby, no towns, no cities, nothing. If they broke down, it would be very hard to get help, so they were both on edge. Suddenly, through the rain, with the help of the faint illumination provided by the truck's headlights, they spot the silhouette of a person walking along the edge of the road around 200 meters in front of them. Their first instinct was to investigate whether this person needed help, because nobody in their right mind would be just strolling along that road at that time of the day. They slowed down the truck and approached the person. It was a bride wearing a long white wedding dress, carrying her shoes. They further slowed down the truck and lowered the window to talk to her. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" No response. She just kept walking while staring straight ahead. After insisting a few times, They rolled up the window and took off because they started to suspect that she could be helping robbers to set up a trap for them. As soon as they passed the bride, they took a look at the rear view mirror to see where she was, and she was nowhere to be found. Here's where this story gets really disturbing. Once they reached the nearest village, they told this story to a baker working at the mini market where they decided to stop to have some brunch. They say they will never forget the look of horror in that man's eyes after hearing it. He was stunned for a few seconds, but after recomposing himself he said, "Yesterday my son went to a friend's wedding and came back around 30 minutes later saying that apparently the ceremony had been cancelled or something, because neither the bride nor the groom showed up. I just heard a few minutes ago in the radio that the guy, who is now missing, murdered his bride on the day of their wedding for no apparent reason." Not a trucker, but it made me cold to the core. I live in a small village in Scotland, and one night a friend and myself were driving back from Glasgow. 40 miles of country back roads, and we were about 25 miles into our trip and no house near us. Never seen anything strange on this road in the last year of living in this area. This night we came round what locals call the bastard's turn, and as we came onto the 4-mile straight after it, there was a dude in the middle of the road, maybe in his early 20s, dragging a deer corpse up the tarmac. It was slit from throat to groin and he was doused in its blood. When we slowed down to pass him, he just stopped dead in the road, stared us right in the eyes, and just crouched down to start patting/stroking the deer's head and smile. Just didn't sit right with me. That's not normal on the best of days, but he stroked the deer in the same way I pet my dog when she's sleepy. Now me and my friend are a pair of well-built lads. Heavily covered in tattoos with dreads, piercings. We don't usually have to worry about our safety or anything, as folk normally want a conversation with us before they want an argument, but I'd be lying if I sat here and said we both didn't have a wee shout and question freak out about it after we got a few miles away. This was a few weeks ago now, and none of the local villages have had any chatter about the bloke and his deer. But I'm keeping a listen out and been taking less night walks with the dog as of recent. My mother is a long-haul trucker, her husband as well. I actually went on the road with them for about 3 months when I was in my early teens. It was a really neat experience. Pissing in bottles, watching my mother read a book while she was driving, watching my stepfather shave while he was driving. I remember one night my stepfather and I were sleeping in the back bunks, and I remember hearing over the PA someone yelling to be careful, that there was a big rig going southbound in the northbound lane. My stepfather woke up to tell my mother to be careful, and he just started screaming at her. Turns out it was her who was asleep and driving down the wrong lane on the freeway. Some other interesting things: we were supposedly hauling gun parts into Nevada. We had a 3-car armed escort. We delivered the gun parts to a tiny truck stop in the middle of the Nevada desert. When we got there, the escort taped up our windows and unloaded the truck. We were not allowed out of the truck, were not allowed to leave until we were completely unloaded. We had speculated that we might have actually been hauling missile parts because the security was really tight. They had hauled gun parts before and had an escort before, but never 3 armed cars. It was cool because we got to bypass all way stations, and we were even allowed to speed. It kind of felt like we were doing something super important and exciting, although in all probability it was probably something not all that interesting, just sensitive. Lot lizards, truck stop hookers, were another interesting thing I was introduced to. Finally, my mom and I had parked the truck at a Flying J to get some food. We ate and came out. It was evening time, and then the parking lot was kinda empty. Seemingly out of nowhere, this massive black man steps out from behind a parked car and starts crying. My mother was already reaching in her bag for the .380 she always carried with her whenever she left the truck alone. The man, I think, realized my mom was reaching for her gun, and he just said, "Please, ma'am, I'm awfully hungry. I'm so sorry to bother you. I swear I just need some food. I haven't eaten in days. I hate to ask you, ma'am, but please, can you buy me a burger?" The guy was full on sobbing, and my mother, who was obviously shaken, said she didn't have any money. I had $50 spending money on me, and I felt he was genuine, and I gave him the entire $50. The man just started crying again, took the money and said, "God bless you both," and he went into the truck stop. My mother said I was stupid and he was going to spend it on crack, but I said I think he was really starving. We watched him, and sure enough, he went in and went directly to the food counter and ordered probably a dozen burgers. That was a good day. Obligatory, not a trucker, but I work as a customer service rep for a trucking company in Omaha. 2 stories that come to mind. Both are quite serious. The first one happened about a year or 2 before I started. One of our local Omaha drivers was grabbing a load from the Council Bluffs rail and headed towards downtown 13th Street. A woman had stepped out in front of his truck and she was killed instantly. Investigators had later found a suicide note she had written shortly before our driver hit her. The driver was a new guy and he quit immediately after the accident. This one happened shortly after I started working there. We dispatch local and OTR drivers, and one evening, just before shutting down for the day, we start getting multiple calls from people in the California area headed west. Motorists are reporting that one of our drivers is speeding, cutting off people, not signaling, and just all around reckless driving. We managed to identify the driver in question, call him up, and the guy is inconsolable. Turns out his sister had been murdered at her apartment and he was literally racing to get back to me as fast as his truck could take him. My boss told him to park the truck immediately, and bought 2 plane tickets. One for the driver to fly back to Omaha, and another ticket to fly a volunteer out to California to pick up his truck. I'm not a trucker, but my job does warrant a lot of nighttime driving. Most terrifying thing I have ever seen at night was when I was driving home from a friend's graduation party. It was 1 a.m. and he lived in a pretty rural area, which was where the party was hosted. Shortly after I pulled out of his drive and went down the road, there was this collection of beat-up mobile homes, not a place you want to be unless you're cooking meth or doing something illegal. On the side of the road just past this, there was a grown man and a little girl knelt down on the side of the road doing something. They both looked up and just stared at me as I drove past. I first shook it off until my dad mentioned it to me a few minutes later. He was taking a different vehicle home and left a little while after me. A few months later we found out from the same family friend that there were some people that collected roadkill in said collection of trailers, and that cops were always there for something. Short haul driving on Northway, toward Quebec. No cell signal or sparse in that area. My cell rings. WTF? No number, no caller on the other end. I turned off the phone. A minute later, I see this red splatter from the right, slow vehicle, lane, into the center, and then like a long drag mark, it ended in the left lane. I slowed a bit and realized, it looked like a rolled up carpet. I kept driving. About 3 kilometers ahead, or about 1.5 miles, there was another truck pulled over, flashers on, and driver inspecting the front. I pulled over to check on him. Sure enough, he was the one that hit the carpet, a deer as he told me. He had a push bar on his Volvo, nice rig, and it was covered in deer entrails and blood. Had to radio in for assistance as he said his temp went up, and there it was, a leg and hoof were literally inside the radiator fins. NYS troopers showed up, those damn flashing LEDs are way too bright, and I guess called in a HD tow truck. The look on the trooper was priceless though. He saw the carpet back down the way, and had no idea what it was, but put in call for dot to clean up. Spit up his coffee when we showed him the deer hoof in the radiator. Kinda surreal with the red/blue strobes. Weirdest of all was the driver that hit that deer, said his phone rang in that same spot mine did, then he saw the deer and tried to change lanes, no luck. Good thing no one got hurt and no one else around, that made it creepier. One time back in 1975 or 1976 I was coming into a small town in the south when I heard a little boy's voice on the CB. He said, "Breaker 1 to 9, is anyone there? Come on back truckers and talk to Teddy Bear." I said, "You got it, Teddy Bear." The boy came back, "Appreciate the breaker. Who we got on that end?" I told him my name and he said, "I'm not supposed to bother you fellows out there. Mom says you're busy and for me to stay off the radio. But I get lonely and it helps to talk because that's about all I can do. I'm crippled and I can't walk." I told him I'd talk to him as long as he'd like. "This was my dad's radio," he said, "but I guess it's mine and Mom's now because my dad's dead. Dad had a wreck about a month ago. He was trying to get home in a blinding snow. Mom has to work now and I'm not much help with my 2 crippled feet. She says don't worry we'll make it, but I hear her crying sometimes late at night. You know there's one thing I want to see more than anything else. I know you guys are too busy to bother with me, but my dad used to take me for rides when he was home. I guess that's all over now since my daddy's gone." Not one breaker came on as that little crippled boy talked with me. I tried hard to hold back tears as I thought about my own boy back in Greenville. Teddy Bear said, "Dad was gonna take Mom and me with him later on this year. He used to tell me someday this old truck will be yours. I know now I'll never get to ride an 18-wheeler again, but this old CB'll keep me in touch with all my trucker friends. Teddy Bear's going to leave you now because it's time for Mom to come home, but give me a shout when you're passing through and I'll sure be happy to talk to you." I said, "Before you go 10 to 10, what's your home 20, little CB friend?" He gave me his address and I didn't hesitate. The freight can wait. I turned my truck on a dime and headed straight for Jackson Street. As I rounded the corner I got one heck of a shock. 18-wheelers were lined up for 3 city blocks. I guess every driver for miles around had heard Teddy Bear talking with me on the radio, and that little crippled boy was having a ball because as fast as one driver would carry him and another would carry him to his truck and take off again. I took my turn hauling Teddy Bear and then I carried him back in and put him down in his chair. If I never lived to see happiness again, I saw it that day in the face of that little man. We took up a collection for him before his mama got home. Every driver said goodbye, and when they were all gone, Teddy Bear shook my hand with a mile-long grin and said, "So long, trucker, I'll catch you again." Before I hit the interstate, I had tears in my eyes. I turned on the radio and I got another surprise. Breaker 1 to 9 came the voice on the air, just one word of thanks from Mama and Teddy Bear. "We wish each and everyone a special prayer because you just made my little boy's dream come true. I'll sign off now before I start to cry. May God ride with you 10 to 4 and goodbye." Where do you want me to start? I'll stick with a story from when I was straight and sober. Coming back from Kununurra, very northern town in Western Australia, to Perth one night. Seen no one else on the road for hours, but every now and then, on a long straight, I could see a set of tail lights in the distance. All of a sudden, there's the tail lights, attached to a trailer that stopped dead in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes and swerved around it, and that's when I realized that the truck, towing 3 trailers, had run off the road into the only large tree for miles. If not for how this ended, I'd laugh my arse off at the irony. I pulled forwards, off the road, and jumped out. My co-driver, who'd been asleep, but got thrown out of the bunk when I slammed on the brakes, was already calling emergency services. As I got to the back of my third trailer, wisps of smoke started from under the cab of the Volvo wrapped around the tree. I raced back, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and was running towards the wreck when I heard a groan from the ditch, about 10 meters in front of the wreck. The driver had been thrown clean through the windscreen, and while he was an absolute mess, at least he was alive. The Volvo was, by now, in flames. But that just gave me some light to inspect old mate for injuries. And then I heard the sound that, even now, tears me to the core. A thin, high-pitched squeal, gradually progressing into the most soul-piercing scream I've ever heard. His co-driver had also been asleep in the bunk. And with the truck wrapped around the tree, he was stuck. And I hadn't thought to fight the fire. And now some poor bastard was burning to death, trapped in a steel coffin, while I just collapsed. Impotent and broken. I still drive trucks now. It's my life. It's cost me several relationships and a marriage, but I don't know anything else that I can do. I love the life, I love the freedom, and I always know that I can lose everything in the blink of an eye. But I never again, and never will, drive as a 2-up team. I could never live with killing a workmate because I fucked up. Many years ago I was on what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that is domiciled out of one city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while a driver domiciled out of that destination will drive halfway with a load that is destined for my city. We meet in a parking lot, switch trailers and drive back home. I had been on this run for a few months and found that I always got to the meet point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot at about 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon, it became apparent that the dog was right outside of my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and is trying to alert me to something, or else he is just a pain in the ass and I will need to throw something at him to scare him off. It is important to note that the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So, I sat up and looked out my window. Standing there, mere inches on the other side of the glass, was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow. And was barking at me. His eyes were crazy and he was frothing at the mouth a little. The scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking all the while. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from then on. I-25 south of Albuquerque, there's a huge dip, straight down one side of a canyon and up the other. I'm a very safe driver, so I took the downgrade slow and crawled up the other side with my hazards on. Looking in my mirror, I see headlights from another truck at the bottom, then 2 jets of flame shoot like 20 feet into the air above it. This truck runs past me doing 80 up the slope. I didn't even know it was possible to put nitrous into a semi. I know it ain't legal, but I thought the devil himself was riding up on me. Ex-tow operator, got a phone call from my wife who was picking me up at 1 a.m. She calls frantic, screaming there's been an insane accident, but she only sees one car. Our shop was a block away. I get there to light it up with my emergency lights and block the scene for first responders. There's only one car. This is a 6-lane bridge that goes over the thruway. The car's engine is inside the firewall. There is no front of the car. I get out and am talking with this guy who's in shock. I ask him, were you hurt? He says, no, I pulled over because I thought I had a flat tire. I walked around the front to look at the passenger's side, and soon as my foot hit the curb I heard a loud bang. I turned around and my car is gone. My next words are, what did you hit? He said nothing at all. Now I'm more confused and hint at the front of his car is gone. He says, nope, that's not my car. WTF. So I start looking around. There isn't a car on the road and nothing within eyesight, which I can clearly see in 1/4 of a mile, and there is nothing anywhere. Some lady comes walking by and he says it's her car. She's hammered as hell. Police and fire get there, and for about 15 minutes he is looking for the car with me. Another cop radios him and says he found the car. It went over 6 lanes and a median, down then up the throughway on ramp, up a hill, through a fence, off 4 parked cars into a pole half a mile away. This things was in park. The car's rear bumper was against the front seat. Estimated her speed at 100+ mph and no tire marks. If he would have taken just a 1/10 of a second delay stepping on that curb, he would have been beyond dead. I was off the clock but helped the police secure the scene until accident investigation showed up. Neither person was hurt and both cars were totaled. I have seen many fatal accidents as a volume FF and a record driver. I have never seen anything like that folks walked away from. I recovered cars and extracted accidents that were nowhere near that bad. Note, car was in park, which don't mean a lot. All you have to do is break the park paw and it will roll. But to go that far, over that much stuff and mostly uphill, and her with such extensive intrusion into the car, even bent the A-pillars, there had to be divine intervention. My buddy is a trucker. He was stopped at this rest stop somewhere in Ohio. He was outside of his truck checking something near the rear trailer wheels. A car pulled upside him and the driver rolled his window down. The driver was a middle-aged male and creepily asked my buddy if he wanted to have a good time. My buddy responded, nah, leave me alone. The guy driving the car sped off. Around 2 hours later, my buddy went back outside to check something near the rear wheels again. As he was bent down, he heard this car approaching quickly. It was the same man he encountered earlier. The man attempted to hit my friend with his car, at probably 25 mph, but was unsuccessful as my friend jumped under the trailer. The driver of the car stopped about 30 feet from the trailer and put his car in reverse. As he began to back up, my buddy grabbed his tire iron and threw it at the car. The tire iron smashed through the rear window of the car. The driver sped off immediately. My buddy didn't get a plate number or great description of the vehicle or guy, as it all happened at night. He was upset that he lost his tire iron though. There's another driver where I work that tells a story about driving through the desert in Arizona back in the 80s with nothing around for miles. When he broke down in the middle of the night, it was an easy fix. His fuel filter was clogged. He drained it a little to free up the fuel and got the truck running. About 15 minutes later, he took off down the highway when he saw a man that was out of breath on the side of the highway that was staring at him as he passed. He said it looked like the guy had been running toward him until he got his truck running and drove away. He said if he had been there a few more minutes, the guy would have been able to walk up on him with his head in the engine bay. He said the look on the guy's face gave him chills, and telling the story you could see it still creeped him out. In the 90s I lived in a logging camp in northern British Columbia. It was a big one made up of trailers and had about 300 people living there, including families. I drove a water truck on weekends when the camp was on days off. When driving on logging roads, you radio your kilometer markings with the name of the road to avoid collisions. Empty on Windfall 10 to say you were 10 clicks on the Windfall Road heading away from camp, and loaded on Windfall 10 to say you were coming back. Anyways, being a weekend, I didn't expect anyone to be hanging around except a skeleton crew. I had no idea that there was a kid's birthday party up on the top end of the Windfall Road. It's beautiful up there with a clear landing and a pond, so why not? The family hired 2 clowns from a nearby town for the kids. Apparently the clowns wrapped up their show and were heading back to camp, but they were not using the radio. I'm on the road in a big water truck doing 50 kmph and they come bombing around a corner doing 50 kmph in a fucking clown car, and we almost collide. I blasted the horn as this car with a plastic star on its roof goes whipping by with 2 screaming clowns inside, and I could just not figure out what the fuck had just happened. A friend who was a truck driver told me this one. He was driving through the edge of some bushland on his way back to Perth, Western Australia, when he hit a kangaroo. He stopped the truck, grabbed his knife, in case he needed to dispatch it, his flashlight, and got out. He went over to the kangaroo. It needed to be dispatched, as it was alive and in immense pain, but he got this weird feeling that he was being watched. He flashed his light around and saw dozens of pairs of red eyes watching him. The whole mob of kangaroos was just standing there watching him kill one of their mates. Kangaroos have red eye shine. He quickly dispatched the kangaroo, bolted back to his truck, and took off. He said it was the creepiest shit he had ever seen on the road. This is a story my dad told me. He was a long-haul trucker for about 15 years, and currently shorter runs in the tri-state area. He and his older brother were tag-team truck drivers back in the early 2000s when timings weren't as closely regulated. They drove 2 trucks, and would switch out when their time driving was up, to hit deadlines faster. One night, as they were driving through Arkansas, I believe, my uncle was leading with my dad behind. My father recalls a giant poof of red, much like when you hit a deer in a semi. The pair thought nothing of it until they pulled over for the night. On my uncle's grill was a hand. Naturally, they freaked the fuck out and called authorities. The hand was confiscated, and it was later discovered to belong to a suicidal man, who had jumped off an overpass and was disintegrated by my uncle's truck. They still made deadline, despite spending a day in jail. They were released when they found the suicide note in the man's house. When I was about 12, our family vehicle broke down on the side of the highway. The 2 adults asked me and my 10-year-old cousin to go walking and find a payphone because one was heavily pregnant and the other was disabled. We walked for about 2 miles when a trucker pulled over and asked what we were doing. We explained the situation, and he said to get in the truck and he would take us to Walmart. He was an older black man with a gray beard and a heavy foreign accent. As we climbed into his truck, he told us we should never ever get in the truck with a strange man because it's extremely dangerous, but we did it anyway and he took us to Walmart and we called somebody to come help us. Any random truck driver could have raped us and killed us easily. But thankfully, this one didn't. I have come upon some god-awful accidents at night. Cars completely under trailers with the tops basically sheared off. People laying in the road after being ejected from their car. The roads can be an awful place at night. The creepiest thing I've ever had happen though was one night I was making a night drop and kept getting the feeling like someone was watching me. The hair kept standing up on the back of my neck and I just felt uneasy. I decided something was off and left to circle back in the morning. Turns out I'm pretty sure someone was watching me because someone was shot and killed there a few nights later in an attempted robbery. That's one thing the person who trained me drilled into me and I tell it to everyone I meet. Always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. It's your subconscious way of telling your brain to pay attention. I've posted this before, but the most frightened I've been driving a truck was going over Donner Pass one night on I-80 toward Sacramento. I had stopped in Reno and checked weather reports. It was early May or late April, can't remember now, but there was still a chance of bad road conditions up there. The weather reports called for light snow flurries and the CA site said chain laws were not in effect, so I went on my way. I got up to the top and suddenly the sky just dumped a blizzard. It was almost total whiteout conditions and I was past the chain up areas and the rest areas with no real safe place to stop. I could just barely make out the tracks of the truck ahead of me and I slowly followed those, praying that he did not run off the road. The worst thing about it, the wind was blowing, making the snow swirl violently in my vision. That caused me to experience this weird vertigo. I have only experienced like that one time. I began to feel like my body was losing which way was up. Fortunately, it did not last very long. I got down to a lower elevation and it suddenly became heavy rain. I was never so happy to see a rainstorm on a mountain that I can remember. My dad's a trucker, has been for about 50 plus years. The most horrifying thing that he saw/happened to him was a really horrid accident on a northern Canadian road. A small car, think like a Volkswagen Beetle, was in an accident. I think a large truck hit her head on, or something like that. Anyways, the accident was so severe that pieces of this woman were everywhere and the road was filled with blood and other bodily matter. This was fairly late in the night, around 1 to 2 a.m., and the Department of Highways sent out one lone guy as a cleanup worker. My dad drove past the accident and saw this guy throwing up in the ditch, so he stopped and asked him if he was okay and what was going on. So the guy told him about the accident and my dad saw everything. The guy was really struggling to clean everything up, and my dad, being the type that'll help out anyone and everyone, helped him clean everything up. This was a few years ago, and he still has nightmares about it. A month ago, a truck driver passed me at least 60 miles per hour and crossed to the other lane to get ahead of everyone else before crossing back to our lane. Thing is, he couldn't go back to our lane because it was closed up ahead. It was a narrow 2-lane road, like each lane for an opposite direction. And they were doing road work on it, so they closed one lane, put a bunch of signs and traffic cones and cops to direct the traffic, because there was only one lane left and cars coming from both directions couldn't ride there at the same time. That would cause a head-on collision. Which is why our side of the traffic stopped entirely, because there was a giant glowing red X in front of us and a traffic cop signing us to stop. Because there were cars from the other direction. But the truck driver didn't see the cars coming at him yet from behind all the red cones and signs, and just ignored all glowing red lights motioning him to stop or at least slow down, and kept going, cutting an entire line of cars who did stop. Until he reached the head of the line just when cars started coming out from the opposite direction and right at him. Never seen a truck brake so hard in real life before. Thankfully it was a small truck, because he stopped pretty quickly and was even able to move a few inches to side so he wouldn't block the road completely. Don't know who got scared the most, the truck driver, the poor driver who he nearly crushed into, or the other drivers watching it. I was driving on a 2-lane road through New Brunswick, Canada, Highway 17 towards Glencoe, around 3 a.m. I has never driven this road and there was nothing around, it was in the middle of nowhere, I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. I passed 2 people and a car on the side of the road looking at a car that was flipped over in the ditch, but still had its lights on, so it looked like it happened recently. The car on the side of the road had no apparent damage. I initially drove past them about 200 meters, then stopped and reversed back to them, and got out to see if they needed help, or a phone or anything. I asked if everything is okay, and they responded in French, not uncommon in that part of the country, so I just motioned to my phone like, "Do you need my phone / do you need to phone someone?" They looked at me and said something else in French, and I got the feeling they didn't need me, so I started walking back to my truck, while looking back at them to confirm they were okay if I left. It just seemed surreal after driving for a long time and seeing no one on the road. These 2 guys were just standing on the side of the road talking and looking at a flipped over car, and didn't seem to be doing anything about it. Also, later that same morning, around 7 a.m., I passed a car that had just hit a moose waiting for paramedics. For the moose was dead, I could see the moose's heart on the road still. I'm not a truck driver, but a couple years ago I was driving home around 1 a.m. with my girlfriend after a graduation party. While coming around a turn we saw headlights on the side of the road. As soon as they saw us, they suddenly shut off. Now being terrified teenagers we slowly drove up, and I was honestly expecting shadowy figures to come out of the trees and try to rob us. But then as we got closer I saw there were 2 cars blocking the road, and a man approached our car with a flashlight. As soon as he saw we were just teenagers on the way home, however, he turned and yelled something. Then all of a sudden flashlights and headlights lit up all around us. Turned out we had interrupted a drag race being set up on a country road. And they had turned off the lights in case we were police. It was a big relief as they moved the cars off the road and let us pass. My grandfather was a truck driver for about 25 to 26 years, so he was pretty good at it. He would normally be gone for days at a time, so he had a sleeper rig with a bed, kitchenette, and stuff like that in the back. Bear with me, this is important. He would normally take naps in the bed in the back in the yard when waiting to get his haul for the day. And would leave the truck on for air conditioning or heat. So this time he decided to sleep in the driver's seat and was asleep for about 10 or 20 minutes. At this point in the story I should mention that my grandfather is 69 years old, but this was about 4 or 5 years ago when this happened. He is a Vietnam War veteran with a Purple Heart and multiple health conditions because of heavy smoking during this time, and he also has some severe PTSD from it. But he is still as strong as an ox. So back to the story. While he was asleep, a guy that was high on meth and heroin at the time of the incident. He had 3 warrants out for his arrest and wasn't allowed to own any weapons, but of course he did. He jumped the fence to get into the truck yard and began to put multiple rounds into the windshield of my grandfather's truck. During this my grandfather of course woke up and dove into the back of his truck and called the cops. After 10 more rounds flew through the windshield, the guy jumped the fence and ran back into the woods and hid there until the cops later found him. My grandfather was all okay and later found out that the guy had been living in the woods for about 3 months before he shot at him. He also later found out that the guy shot at him because my grandfather stole his spacesuit, which my grandfather did not do. Everyone is okay now and the guy is in prison for 1 more year. So that's my story. Sorry about the Lingine, but I'm known to do that at times. Just want to say this is about a gruesome event, so you have been warned. My dad is a driver through and through, he loves it, he's done it his whole life. He grew up spending summers in a gravel pit, watching his dad drive and sometimes driving when no one was looking. When he got older he drove a log truck, and then a flatbed up into the Canadian bush, as he says, deep, human-less wilderness, to pick up or drop off equipment before or after jobs. He always says, if anyone starts talking about ghosts or aliens, that in all the dark, empty places and roads he's been, he's never seen anything that pointed to their existence. Worry about wolves, not ghosts, he says. I'm going to ask him how he would answer this, but I think one of the worst things he was ever. Around, I guess, was when that person was decapitated on the Greyhound bus by the crazy dude that was like, eating his ears and stuff. My dad drives truck again now, but he drove for Greyhound for over 30 years in between. One of my dad's best friends was driving that bus. Can you fucking imagine? You're driving a bus, people start freaking out back there. You're looking in your mirror, assessing. You pull over and see what's actually going on. Like, fuck. My dad was his friend's first call, after he got his passengers out and locked the crazy dude, and dead person, inside. At this time, all the guys my dad was driving with were an old guard of professional, courteous drivers who were hugged by old women and given baking in at every stop, who were also grizzled badasses who would literally, physically throw drunk assholes out on the side of highways. They didn't take any shit. So his friend actually went back on the bus a few more times, trying to reason with the guy, get the knife, get him to quit. He stopped doing that when the crazy guy, knife in hand, blood on face, started advancing up the aisle to him. I'm not sure how much you guys know about this incident, but it was so extended. The police arrived, but for whatever reason he stayed on the bus for so long, stalking back and forth and eating. My dad's friend was so fucked up about it he didn't even realize. He didn't want to drive passengers, so he drove trucks for Greyhound until his wife broke down and called my dad about how his friend needed help. The friend's whole demeanor and personality had changed and he, the friend, didn't even realize until confronted with it. Hess doing well now, in a related but non-driving job. My dad went into the union and fought until there were metal detectors and searches being done before people were allowed on the bus, so no one could bring a weapon on again. He retired from that job and is driving long haul again and, his words, having a ball.